Canberra, Australia, September 18th, 2025. The stage was set in Canberra as Australia's Prime Minister Anthony Albanese stepped up to the lectern. The press conference carried a mix of anticipation and urgency, reflecting the scale of what he was about to announce. With cameras flashing and journalists leaning forward, Albanese laid out what he described as a defining moment for Australia's climate and economic future. The Prime Minister's arrival was marked by deliberate symbolism. Behind him stood banners of the Australian government, signalling the weight of national responsibility. To his right, Energy Minister Chris Bowen was ready to reinforce the government's message. The focus of the announcement was clear: Australia's 2035 emissions target, a benchmark that could shape the nation's path for decades. Albanese wasted no time connecting his announcement to both scientific consensus and national duty. Anthony Albanese said, "We listen to the science and we act in Australia's national interest, and that is why we're acting on the advice of the Climate Change Authority." This statement set the tone for what followed, a careful balance of environmental urgency and political pragmatism. After weeks of consultation, analysis and preparation, Albanese confirmed that his government had accepted the Climate Change Authority's advice. Anthony Albanese declared, "Today I announce that we have accepted their advice that Australia's 2035 emissions target be 62 to 70%. This is a responsible target, backed by the science, backed by a practical plan to get there, and built on proven technology. It's the right target to protect our environment, to protect and advance our economy and jobs, and to ensure that we act in our national interest. And in the interest of this and future generations, the numbers, 62 to 70%, are ambitious. They position Australia among a group of advanced economies aiming to make sharp cuts in greenhouse gas emissions within the next decade. The emphasis on practicality, technology and jobs was deliberate, reflecting the need to frame the target not just as environmental policy, but as a roadmap for growth. The announcement was not only about emissions, but also about economic transformation. Albanese stressed that climate policy cannot be separated from national prosperity. Protecting jobs and ensuring that workers are part of the transition formed a core part of the message. Australia's economy, long reliant on fossil fuel exports, now faces a strategic choice: embrace the global shift to clean energy or risk being left behind. Chris Bowen, the Minister for Climate Change and Energy, echoed this point with an unmistakable sense of urgency. Chris Bowen said, "Thanks very much, Prime Minister. The global shift to clean energy is the biggest economic transformation since the Industrial Revolution, and it presents Australia with our best ever economic opportunity. If we get it right, if we make the right investments at the right time, we can grow our economy and create good jobs for Australians." Bowen's remarks framed climate action as both an environmental imperative and a once-in-a-generation chance to redefine Australia's economic identity. This announcement arrives at a critical juncture. Across the world, governments are racing to meet the pledges of the Paris Agreement. The next United Nations Climate Change Conference looms large, and expectations for countries like Australia are rising. For decades, Australia has been criticised for dragging its feet on climate change, often seen as a reluctant player due to its deep ties to coal and natural gas. Yet, today's target signals an effort to reposition the nation as a leader rather than a laggard. The 2035 benchmark, 62 to 70% below 2005 levels, not only aligns Australia with scientific advice, but also answers pressure from allies, businesses and climate advocates. Domestically, Albanese's announcement will spark debate across the political spectrum. Supporters will hail it as overdue leadership, while critics may argue it risks jobs in traditional energy sectors. Balancing this narrative will be central to how the government sells the plan in the months ahead. The Prime Minister, aware of the political sensitivities, underscored that the target is responsible and practical, built on proven technology rather than experimental promises. The language was crafted to disarm opponents who might claim the policy is unrealistic. Announcing a target is one thing, delivering it is another. The government will now need to outline sector-by-sector strategies, how agriculture, industry and transport will contribute, what role renewables and storage will play, and how workers in fossil fuel industries will be supported in the transition. Albanese has tied the plan to national interest, future generations and economic opportunity, but the practical steps, investments in infrastructure, reforms in energy markets and regional development will determine success or failure. Beyond Canberra, the announcement will be closely watched in Washington, Brussels and Beijing. Australia's shift could strengthen its standing with key trading partners who are increasingly linking trade agreements and investment flows to climate action. If implemented effectively, the policy could enhance Australia's competitiveness in emerging markets such as hydrogen, critical minerals and green manufacturing. Conversely, failure to deliver could expose the government to international criticism and domestic backlash. The use of quotes from both the Prime Minister and the Climate Change Minister was intentional. By anchoring the announcement in both political leadership and technical authority, the government aimed to reassure Australians that this target is not a symbolic gesture, but a grounded, science-based decision. The phrase biggest economic transformation since the Industrial Revolution from Bowen was designed to leave an impression, framing the climate challenge as historical rather than abstract. Meanwhile, Albanese's insistence that the target was backed by science and in the national interest reflects an attempt to bridge divides between environmentalists, industry stakeholders and ordinary Australians who worry about cost of living pressures. Over the next decade, Australians will be living through this transformation. The impact will be visible in energy bills, transport choices, industrial policy, and international negotiations. How well the government manages these changes will likely determine its political legacy. For now, the announcement marks a turning point. A Prime Minister, once cautious about overpromising, has placed a bold number on the table. The range, 62 to 70%, carries both ambition and flexibility, leaving room for adjustment as technology and global markets evolve. On this day in Canberra, Anthony Albanese made climate history. His words reflected urgency, responsibility and opportunity. Anthony Albanese stated, "It's the right target to protect our environment, to protect and advance our economy and jobs, and to ensure that we act in our national interest and in the interest of this and future generations." And with that, Australia's path to 2035 became clearer, though far from easy. The next decade will test not only the science and technology behind this goal, but also the political will and collective resolve of the nation.